Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
And Mary said, Behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Unveiled here on Truth Frequency Radio, and I hope everybody is having a blessed evening. I'm honored to have as guest with me author Kylee Buckley. She has released a book called I Mary about the Virgin of the Lord. And so, Kylee, are you there?
I am Zed. Zen, how are you? Thank you for having me to
Oh,
speak on the
yeah.
show.
It's a great honor. And what time is it out there?
Well, I'm in New Zealand and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon here.
Oh,
And
okay. So it's not
yeah,
real late.
no,
Okay.
it's a
Well,
good
good.
time to chat. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Well, that works out great. Well, excellent. Well, why don't you tell people about a little bit about your book, as well as what inspired you and where they can find it.
sure. Well, I've been studying a lot in ancient texts and scrolls, and just for my own interest, really. And through that, I came across a number of the infancy scrolls and various other ancient books that have been published. And I would read them to my daughter, and she would say to me, she said to me one night that, Mummy, you should really write this into a book so that everyone can understand what really happened back
Mm-hmm.
then, and who Mary is, and or was, and just all the stories that I would tell her, because I'd read them bit by bit. So yeah, I thought I would. So that's what I've done. I've put it all together in a date sequence order, so people can actually read from the beginning to the end and actually get some continuity and sort of understand the feel of her and who she was and her heart through that. Um, so, yeah, I've been a truth seeker for about 10 years now. I came to the Father about 10, 12 years ago, and I only wanted to know the truth. I wasn't interested so much in going to church and listening to what other people say. I really wanted to know the facts and to change my own thoughts, that obviously weren't correct on a lot of things. So I'm often challenging my own preconceived ideas and notions with things that I learn and find, and replacing them with what actually is true. So I've thoroughly enjoyed the process of putting the book together. It took me about 2 months to do the first one, which is Anna and Joachim, which is her parents and their story, because that's all about where Mary comes from and the bloodlines. And then 2 years, I suppose, to put her story together and to make sure what I was writing down was as accurate as I could get it. Because even in a lot of the writings, there's one would say they went to Nazareth, another one would say they go to Bethlehem. So, yeah, I'd had to sort of work out everything around it to come up with where I really do think she went based on other writings. So, yeah, it's been a really exciting process, and I'm very thrilled to have finished it and released it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that because people, well, when they started to put together the canon, they did not want the focus to be on Mary, and so they excluded all the information which is connected and linked to her. And because of that, not a lot of people know about the history of Mary or her parents, and how they were barren for a very long time, and that
Yeah.
affected deeply their relationship even with the Israelites, and that they were mocked and belittled quite often because they were barren, didn't have children for a long while, but they were to be like Sarah and several others, couples and mothers, as we'll go through in the course of the evening, talking about them, that God really had a special place for her parents and with the birth of Mary, and that she was a very special child, unequaled among women, according to some of the scriptures. And it's, for people that have not read or studied the infancy gospels, which I find them to be deeply moving. The first, I don't know, 10 or 15 times that I read from the various narratives, the Protevangelium of James, the infancy gospels of Thomas, and other things, I was so moved that they literally brought me to tears. And I remember that I wanted my parents to know, because my mother loved Yahusha so very much, and they had never read or studied or heard about these manuscripts. And so when I first discovered them, I remembered sitting them down and reading the entire, a lot of what I had then. And we just, wept together. And it was a beautiful moment for me in sharing that with my parents. And so, what was it like for you when you first read through and studied them? And as you said you shared them with your daughters. Was there any occasion like that where you were just so, moved by the Spirit to find yourself just bawling in tears?
Yes, there were times like that. Just how normal she was, as well as how much she loved the Lord, and she loved pureness and loved people. And when she was with Gabriel, and he told her that she was going to be the bearer of the one that created the heavens and the earth, and how she couldn't understand, how could the one that created all that we see, the world that we live in, and the heavens where the angels dwell, and how is it at all possible that he can dwell within my body, within my frame? And who am I that can be the case, and that I am to be that chosen one? So the humility with her, and just how she was trying to understand it, and it was like she was being told, but it hadn't really, initially it didn't sink in. She was in her human mind. Yet she had had many encounters with angels from a young girl, and grew up acquainted with their visitations. But yeah, that to me, it was a pinnacle time of how she managed that. And through her story, you see that humaneness, come through. And then you see the great strength that she has come through with that. This is why I wanted to write the book, because it's an untold story to most people. I never knew. I had no idea that the story existed, and I didn't really ever give her a thought until I started looking into it, and it captivated me entirely to write this down in the book. Another thing that really captured me as well was the story of her parents. How righteous in the world sense they were, and Yahusha, her father, gave a third to the poor, and a third to to himself, and then a third to, I think it was the temple. Yeah, and he was one of the richest men around in the day. He was very known, he was very respected, but how their heart's desire to have a child was not met. And it even goes back to Anna's mother. It's not Mary or Maria. It's Maisha, something like that. It is. It's hard to explain because it's a different language. But she also was very late in having a child, which was Mary's grandmother, and they knew through their family line, because Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, was back in their family line, back further, and it had been prophesied in their family line that they will bring the Messiah, but nobody knew who. And it's interesting how, as we will talk about it, that being, God preserves and waits for that timing, and in His timing, everything comes together. But just what they went through, how they were mocked and treated, and it's really sad, really. They went through all of that, but I suppose then they had the breakthrough when the child was born, and all would marvel because it was not through the normal course. They were elderly and beyond the years of normal childbearing, which is a pattern that He uses. Yeah, so those two things really for me stood out, and just the trials that she went through, and how she lived her life. One of the chapters is hidden yet exposed. She was there, but on the world, of course, but she was hidden. Her life and things that, what was happening to her and the story. She couldn't talk to people about it because how would anybody ever, in their carnal mind, understand her and understand what the angel had said to her and what her journey ahead will be. So she lived her life, not outwardly like a lot of people do. Yeah. So that's something that I thought a lot about.
It reminds me, Rob and I have been going through the story of Abraham in great detail in the Genesis, like 14 through 17, and just what Sarah had gone through and being barren, and that, being old, she didn't think she was going to be able to bear children, and then giving her handmaid Hagar to Abram, that afterward she was mocked and ridiculed by Hagar, and she became really hateful to her. And then, when she was told that she was going to bear a child in, her late 90s, she laughed. She didn't think that, it would be possible. And so the story, in similarity even to Anna, that when they were told and they prayed, and she had promised to, to put Mary into the temple and to dedicate her to the Most High in that manner, if she could bear fruit. And, as you said, Joachim, that he was a very holy individual and very giving, and took care of the orphan and the widowed, and the poor and the destitute, and was a very righteous man. And so I wanted to bring up, because I know that you had mentioned and you wanted to be sure to inform people that with your book, it has in no way any connection to what the Catholics have done in elevating Mary to a symbol of worship, and that there's no, with regard to what you're bringing forth, the information and the that which you are writing, that has nothing to do with any kind of, Mary worship, or seeing her as being anything but, even though she was unequaled among women, she was not godlike or supernatural in any aspect.
Yes, that's right. Well, since I've written my book, I've been on other forums, which I never would have gone on the internet in regard to Mary, and I'm absolutely shocked by a lot of the thoughts that are out there concerning her. I was never brought up in a Catholic church, so I don't have any idea of what is other ideas that are out there of her. And it's been really good because I've been able to put things, to be able to engage myself, I suppose, in a way that can help people think about things that they think about in a different way. Yes, look, Mary was chosen because she had made a vow, and her parents had made a vow too, that she would remain unmarried, that she would remain a virgin, because you see, the Lord God really respects purity. And I see that as an attack on our age with all the sex before marriage and the gay and lesbian pride that's happening now. And you see, she wanted no part of anything that would bring a stain upon her, that God wouldn't look upon her as, she wouldn't want to disappoint the Father in any way. So, and she knew that part of being holy was to remain unlustful in any way. So the vow was made upon her before she was born, and all her life she kept it. Well, she grew up in the temple, but of course when she came to growing up, she was about 12 years of age, or heading towards 12, and all the girls leave the temple to get married or go back to their families where they came from to get married. But Mary's father, Joachim, had died because he was quite old in years when she was born, and her mother had since remarried, and she wasn't fit to go back there. I don't know why, apart from the fact that her mother had moved on to live somewhere else, potentially. However, Mary did not want to marry, and it caused quite a problem through the readings in the infancy Gospels and the Ethiopian and Aramaean Gospel of the infancy. It talks there about they had to find a suitable person for her. So this is what happened. And they put a decree around all of Judea for suitable men of the tribe of Judah that were widowed, who would look after her, essentially. So that's what happened. And she went to be with Joseph, who was much, much older than her as well. He was 80 to 90 years of age. Not a young man. He had already had his family, which were Jesus' brothers. But you see, she made this vow. And when you read through the writings and things that she says, she kept that vow regardless of the cost. And even to the point when Gabriel was coming to her and she's saying, but I'm a virgin. I can't have a child. I'm a virgin, and I'm to remain a virgin. And that's why she was chosen from the Lord. He loved her for her vow and for her tenacity to keep it, regardless what problems were caused by it. And and even to the point when she actually had the Lord in the cave, she was checked, and she remained a virgin. There was no blood or any obvious things to look at to say that she had not, to say that she had had a child. She looked like she hadn't. So anyway, what was your question, Zen?
Well, there's a couple points I want to bring up, but we were, just talking about the Mary worship as far as the Catholic Church. But a couple of things I want to bring up that you had made mention of, and I think that are very important for people to understand and to recognize. And that has to do with Joseph being an elderly widowed man, and that he had no interest at all in having or even marrying Mary, even though he, yes, accepted the role of being her guardian and caretaker. He had no interest in bearing children with her, and was even going to keep her for one of his grandchildren who were closer in age to Mary's age, and also that he had children that were already very much older than she was. He did have some younger children that were close in age and that were raised, like brothers, Thomas and James. They were raised as brothers with Yahushua, but Mary remained a perpetual virgin her entire life, which is something that is not clear in the canonical materials. And many people believe that Mary did, after the Immaculate Conception of Christ, to go on and bear children with Joseph. But again, this is entirely not true. She was confirmed to be a virgin by the midwives, Salome, and there were two midwives that were there at the cave, and then also by the Pharisees themselves and those that had brought forth and that were going to initiate Yahushua as part of the priesthood. And so you know about that manuscript on the priesthood of Jesus Christ?
Yes, I do. Through you, Zen, through you reading it. I didn't know about it until you read it that time online, and I was just thrilled. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible, amazing. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's right.
Yeah. So, can you comment on those points? Because I think they, are critical, and in bringing out some of those concepts, a lot of people criticize me, saying, well, how can she be a perpetual virgin? And according to Matthew, it says that, afterwards she bore children with Joseph and those kind of things.
That's right. It does say that, but her words themselves, in her life and things that happen dictate that. And I think too, I've often thought, when she was examined, the only way, to be honest, to know if someone's a virgin is if the hymen is intact. So, in the wedding, so it must have been intact. And as I've studied this and I've looked at it and over and around it and seeked everything I could find on it, and the only thing that I can say is that it was God himself that delivered Jesus out of her womb, and that it was not in the usual manner that one would have a child, and that Mary could not speak about it because nobody would ever believe how or why. And I've thought about it. Has it been through the belly button, or how? Or did he just appear? We don't know. But there are other things, like when Joseph was walking and everything stood still. It was like, because he was looking for a midwife, and all nature stood still, and it was like time had stood still. There'll be a child drinking from the river, and it would be like it was paused. Everything was paused. Right. And he saw the heaven open up, and he saw like God coming down to earth. It was just, and it was like he was the only one that wasn't paused. And it's just something that is beyond the physical world. And when you read through how it was for Mary, like in the cave itself, how the angels came down from heaven, and the cave was filled with such light and singing, and talks about it in the revelation of the magi when they arrived as well. But the only way I could describe it from what I've read is that heaven came to earth on that day, literally. And And even Mary was transfixed in the whole thing, as if it was just, something quite supernatural. And I've explained it the best that I can in my book. I believe I've captured that moment. I could read a wee bit of it, but I don't want to spoil it for people that have got the book or are buying the book.
I think that's a good point that you brought up, as far as, that there was something incredible that happened, even with Joseph when he went in search of the midwives, about how he did have this experience of time standing still and all of creation waiting for, what would be the moment of Christ coming. All right, we'll be right back, everyone.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased, as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity, but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures. Everyday questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
Which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Hey Zen, I just want to read something.
Go ahead, Kylee.
I just thought I'd read something. This is about when Jesus was born. In that hour, a great silence descended with fear, for even the wind stopped. They made no breeze. There was no movement of the leaves on the trees, nor sound of water heard. The streams did not flow, and there was no motion of the sea. All things born in the sea were silent. No human voice sounded, and there was a great silence. For the pole itself ceased its rapid course from that hour, and the measure of time almost stopped. Everyone was overwhelmed with great fear and kept silent. We were expecting the advent of the Most High God, the end of the world. As the time drew near, the power of God showed itself openly. The maiden stood looking into heaven. She was like a vine. For now the end of the events of salvation was at hand. When the light had come forth, Mary worshipped him, whom she saw she had given birth to. The child himself, like the sun, shone brightly, beautiful, and most delightful to see, because he alone appeared as peace, bringing peace everywhere. In that hour when he was born, the voice of many invisible beings proclaimed in unison, Amen. And that light which was born was multiplied, and it obscured the light of the sun itself by its shining rays. The cave was filled with the bright light, with a most sweet smell. The light was born just as the dew descends from heaven to the earth, for its perfume is fragrant beyond all the smell of ointments. I, however, stood stupefied and amazed. Fear seized me. I was gazing at the intense bright light which had been born. The light, however, gradually shrunk, imitated the shape of an infant, then immediately became outward an infant like a child, born normally. I became bold and leaned over and touched him. I lifted him in my hands with great awe, and I was terrified, because he had no weight like the other babies who were born. I looked at him, and there was no blemish on him, but his whole body was shining, just as the dew of the Most High God. He was light to carry, radiant to see. For a while I was amazed at him, because he did not cry as newborn infants were accustomed to. While I held him, looking into his face, he smiled at me with the most joyful smile, and, opening his eyes, he looked at me intently. Yeah, so that's come from, I believe it was James, who was there or around there at the time, and he wasn't at the cave when he was born, but he was there outside, and that's come from 404 of the Arundel collection of translations.
Yeah, there's an interesting aspect as well, with regard to Yahusha and his birth, his immaculate conception into this world, and that is, according to the story, that he, in appearance, took on in shape and form what seemed to be a boy about 2 years of age. And that one of the reasons why Herod slaughtered all of the children in Bethlehem that were 2 years and younger is because of this. And that he also, upon entering and coming into the world, spoke to his mother and those that were present, to the magi, and told them that he had come to fulfill the role of his father, the mission that he was given even before the foundations of the world, to be Savior Messiah and to redeem, to rectify the fall and to restore humanity to their original bright nature and to their former estate. And so those things are also made clear within the infancy gospels. And another point, which I think is so critical and so very important for people to understand, is that he entered the world with divine providence, that he didn't and wasn't human I mean, he was human, of course, but he was also born with the power and the providence of the Godhead, and that this wasn't an anointing that came upon him when he was being baptized in the River Jordan by John the Baptist. Yes, the Holy Spirit did come upon him and show and as an indication confirm that he was very special and unique to the world. But as we see again in the infancy gospels, Mary was able to perform miracle and healing and to break people of their possession by demonic entities and to cure things like leprosy just by using his bathwater or in giving people his swaddling clothes. And so those kind of things were imbued with the miracle authority that he had over all of creation, even since his time as a little babe and as a little child. And that the ancient stories also verify that, we have the one story in Luke of him being 13 years old and leaving his parents, going back to the temple and teaching the men of knowledge, the men of wisdom there, and them being baffled at the majesty of his instruction. And even though it's a little bit ambiguous within that particular narrative, in the infancy gospels, it's very clear that even at the age of 4 years old, when Mary and Joseph tried to find him an instructor, a teacher, that he was already so knowledgeable that nobody could take him on as student. He would just humble them and they would feel foolish before him. And so he never had to go to school because he was already, he was the creator of all things. How can you tell the creator about his creation? You can't.
No, you can't. And the thing is too that everybody knew who he was, and this is something that came obvious to me as I was starting to do some study on it all. It was announced before he came. It's been announced many years beforehand with all the prophecies and the covenants. And then when he was here, with what happened with Joseph, having to marry her, everybody knew who Mary was. She was put on trial with Joseph. That's in my book. People knew.
Right. That's an important story. Please elaborate on that.
Yes. Okay. I will. But before I do that, I just want to read something about Joseph's sons, how they feared Jesus. And I'll just read this wee bit because I've just got it here. It says,
Sure.
Joseph came to a feast with his sons, James, Joseph, Judah, and Simeon, and 2 daughters. Jesus met them with Mary, his mother, along with her sister Mary, a daughter of Cleopas, whom the Lord had given to her father Cleopas and her mother Anna. That's Anna remarried Cleopas and had another daughter named Mary. She actually remarried for the 3rd time and had another daughter called Mary, so it gets confusing. Never mind, because they had offered Mary, the mother of Jesus, to the Lord, and she was called by the same name of Mary for the conclusion of appearance. And when they had assembled, Jesus sanctified and blessed them. And he was the first to begin to eat and drink, for none of them dared to eat or drink or sit at table or to break bread until he had sanctified them. And if he happened to be absent, they used to wait for him. And when he did not wish to come for refreshments, neither Mary or Joseph or the sons of Joseph, his brothers, came. And indeed, these brothers, keeping his life as a lamp before their eyes, observed him, and they feared him. And when Jesus slept, whether day or night, the brightness of God shone upon him. Praise be the glory to God forever and ever. Amen. So I just wanted to read that little bit because we're just talking about him. He was miraculous from the beginning to the end, of course. God. And they knew. It wasn't a surprise. And same with Jesus' disciples. A lot of them were family that came
Yes.
through his mother's marriages, and that. So now, just getting back to what was it I was going to talk about? The Zen. What did you want me to enlighten on?
The story of them, the trial that Joseph and
Yes.
Mary were put through with the bitter water.
Yes, it's Joseph had where they were living up in Nazareth. There was because Joseph had been away for a while. They had a visit from the local priest at the temple, and it became apparent to him that when Mary stood up, that she was pregnant. And so what happened is it went to Jerusalem, this news, and they were summoned to go down there. They were basically arrested and put on trial. And you can imagine it and how Mary would feel because she was pregnant. They hadn't got married. And she had been this devout young girl in the temple that gave everything she had to the poor, the food. She was a very humble girl, and with everything that had happened where she had to marry Joseph and then to shame him, to have to come to Jerusalem, and she couldn't hide it. She was very pregnant. This happened after she came back from seeing Elizabeth. So she had grown quite some, and they were put on trial, the two of them, Joseph first and then Mary. And Mary's mother came to see her, and I talk about it, about her in the crowd in my book. But you see, they had to drink this drink, which is basically the dust from the earth and probably other things put in this water, and walk around the temple. And if they were guilty of having sex out of marriage, or, they would die. They were cursed. Their belly would swell and basically suffocate them. I think this is the way. It's in Numbers 5, I believe. It talks about it. And so Joseph went on trial first, and then Mary. The thing I like about the story is Mary finds courage, and she stands out there in front of everyone that's poo-hooing her and rubbishing her, and she speaks that I am innocent and God Almighty will vindicate. And I'll have to find it now in my book. And it's a wonderful scene. I think this book would make an amazing movie with the things that they went through. It's we're not told about this in the scriptures.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are excluded. Another thing that I find quite fascinating, and something that I write about in my book on the Vestures of Light and the Rod of Wonder, is the stem of Jesse and the Isaiah prophecy about even Joseph when he was selected as Mary's guardian, that there was a supernatural sign of a rose bloom budding from the end of his staff, and then the dove as the Holy Spirit landing upon it, and that this sign was seen in front of all Israel, and that he was then selected to be her caretaker, which he was quite hesitant of because he was up in age. He was 90 years old, and he did not want to be attached to a young girl, 14 years of age, and did not want to be her caretaker, and certainly didn't want to marry her. And so he only did this because of the high priest basically saying you don't want to turn your back on God's word, or his appointment of him as being caretaker. And so he did hesitantly take her on. And it's intriguing that in the story of him going forth and going out to do his work and then returning back, when he finds her pregnant, that he says, has not the story of Adam been repeated in me? And that's very intriguing to me, because it shows that it was common knowledge among the Israelites in that time that Eve was beguiled by the serpent and impregnated with Cain, and that Cain was, regarded as the firstborn of the wicked one, which is something that is clear now, especially when people read and study from the Targum. But this is something that is common knowledge and portrayed within the Protevangelium and the ancient narratives, with regard to the story of Joseph and Mary. But of course, we know that whereas Eve was beguiled by the serpent, that Mary knew no man, and that the Holy Spirit was said to come upon her, and that Christ entered into her womb of his own volition, according to the history of Joseph the carpenter, which is another fascinating text that shows us that Joseph was an elderly man, and that he had children from a previous marriage, and that his wife passing away, that's why he was an elderly widowed man at the time that he became Mary's guardian. But that's another, incredible story that, as you said, that if somebody really made a movie of the early life of Mary and the things that her and Joseph had to go through. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yes, I actually have great sympathy for Joseph, because he never wanted this. He was ready to die. He was quite happy. He was
right.
well on in his years. Most of his children had grown up and were married. His 2 daughters were, and I think 2 of the sons were at that time, what I can perceive. And, he just sort of came along. He nearly didn't even go to this summons that they had. And he at the last moment, he decided to go. Well, I don't know whether he regretted it or not. I don't think he did in the end, because of everything that happened. But had he known what was ahead of him, and this is the thing, like with Mary, had she known, she was just a girl. She just wanted to keep herself pure for the Lord. She never knew her story or the road that was to be laid out for her. Right. And it's wonderful that people hold her in high regard. And I think we all need to esteem to be like Mary. But what she went through, I really don't think that she had a nice life, to be honest. It would have been amazing.
Oh, it's hard, so hard.
Very much so. And, look, even when Jesus died, she never regained any sense of happiness, and you don't if you lose your son. And she loved Yahusha with all her heart.
Yes.
But he was her son. He was her child, and she bore him and loved him and nurtured him and taught him, and he was all she had in life. And as Joseph died, she didn't have any other blood relatives as such, close, no other children. And she really was very brokenhearted and never recovered. And this is the thing, which I think about with, the Catholics, how they hold her in regard. And they're right, she was a perpetual virgin. They've got that right. But, they look at her too as the incarnate one. They've gone a step too far. I think what's happened is there's been a morphing of who Jesus is into Mary, where Mary was very, very special and chosen and delicate and strong and all those things, but she was still born of a sperm and an egg. She was conceived by a spirit. She was never conceived by anything different to that. And these words, incarnate one. Well, in means not. Incarnate means fleshly form. So they're saying that she's incarnate, which is not a fleshly form, but she was. She was fully human, but she had an extraordinary mission, an extraordinary life from the beginning to the end. She was chosen and blessed, because no one else can say that they brought forth the Messiah. She was chosen for that role and very special for that. But she wasn't the incarnate one. Jesus was the one that came from the eternal into our world, and again will come back. And the Immaculate Conception, immaculate, means not, and conception means without spot or sin. Where our Bible says that all men have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Now, I think if there was ever a person that walked the earth, apart from, Abraham, perhaps, would be one, I'd say. Mary would be another. There's bound to be a few of them that to us seem absolutely sinless, that they knew God intimately. However, they're still flesh, still human, still born of a sperm and an egg. And it's. I just think things have just got a little bit twisted over the years, and it's really important that we all really check what we believe and check the history of it, because it's important that what we believe is truth, and because otherwise we're believing something that is a lie, and so I wanted to sort of mention that in this talk today about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very important, and one of the reasons why, we're not supposed to pray to Mary, because she's passed on. She isn't part of the Godhead, and it would be much like idolatry, where you're worshiping or praying to stones or wood or, things that can't hear you. Just as she has gone on, she can't hear you. Whereas Christ, he's in the Holy Spirit, and God, they are ever present, omniscient, ever living. And so, and they know the end from the beginning. They can hear all things. They even hear your prayers and understand the intent of them before you ever even express them in your mind or in, vocalizing them with your words. And so very important, the differentiation. Last night, I did a show where I read the healing of Tiberius, and then I ended with the story of just the death of Mary and the passing of Mary in the Gospel of Gamaliel, the lament of the Virgin Mary, and the martyrdom of Pontius Pilate. And I was so deeply moved, even by sharing that story. It was hard for me to get through it without, just being deeply moved by the Spirit. And I, had to really take my time to hold back the tears in just revealing just the deep love that both Christ had for Mary, his mother, and also that Mary had for him. And it was expressed so beautifully in that particular account. And so if people have not had a chance to hear the show that I did last night on the healing of Tiberius, if people want to know more, the Gospel of Gamaliel gives an account of the story of Mary's passing and also the Passion of Christ in greater detail than most other texts that are out there and available for study. But anyways, we'll be right back, everyone, for second hour.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures. Everyday questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
All right, welcome back everybody for a second hour. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. And I am interviewing Kylee Buckley, the author of I, Mary. And so, Kylee, I'll turn it back over to you and let you pick up on any points or anything of interest that you'd like to bring up in sharing, about the narrative of the story you captured in your book.
I was just going to read something, Zen, which is about Mary when she was on her deathbed, because we were just talking about that before the break.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how Jesus came to her. And he spoke. This is coming from the Assumption of the Virgin, the Discourse of Theodosius, Archbishop of Alexandria. And it reads that Jesus spoke of the necessity of death. And he said that if she were translated, wicked men will think concerning you that you are a power which came down from heaven, and that the dispensation or the incarnation took place in appearance. So he knew that, you see, things would probably, over time, people would believe that she was more than just a human, and would perhaps make her the focus of worship instead of him and his sufferings for our redemption. Yeah.
Right. So. Yeah, very important. And, again, even though she was unequaled among women, still, she was a regular human being. And so very important to recognize that, and that, Christ selected her as to be the vessel of honor for his entrance into the world. And certainly they had an incredible relationship in the story of even what they had to overcome together. And there was a lot of suffering for her in the things that they encountered, even in raising him. Another aspect of the story, which very few people know about or understand, is that when they were told to flee from Bethlehem and to go into Egypt for the couple of years that they were away from Israel, that when they entered into some of these towns, some of the Egyptian towns, because Christ was imbued with the authority of heaven, and that he, was recognized as the ruler, the king of even the heavens and the earth, that some of the idols, when they went into these particular towns, the idols would bow before him and would come crashing down upon their face in order to bow before him. And they, the people that were idol worshipers, they were not very happy about that, and certainly not fond of Christ. And they believed it to be some kind of supernatural magic, and they didn't recognize him as, of course, the Son of God, and that they worshipped, a pantheon of gods and goddesses. But this happened time and time again, that even in the when he was brought before Pontius Pilate, when he was forced to go to trial, and they had brought him into the governor's mansion, that the Jews complained about how all the Roman banner, the holders of the banners, that the banners and the flags and everything bowed before Christ, recognizing his divinity. And the Jews were complaining about that, why the Roman soldiers were acknowledging him in that banner. But the soldiers told them that they did no such thing. And of course, they did not believe that Christ was the Son of God, didn't know him or recognize him as such. And that when they told the Jews to basically take over and to bring your own strongmen, and they asked Christ to exit and to come back in. And even then, they were unable to prevent the banners from bowing before his authority. And so many instances of where the idols and, you know, the false gods, all, even the devils recognized him as the Son of God. And
Yes.
so even though the Jews denied, and much of the world did not recognize his holy status, and yet the devils, the demons, legion, and, you know, those, especially the apostles and those that were really witness to his family, especially, which also, you know, many of them became apostles, James and Didymus Thomas, those that wrote the infancy gospels. But these kind of things are unknown unless you do read some of the ancient stories. And so can you share some of your most favorite accounts of, you know, the childhood of Christ, and, you know, some of the stories that really touched your heart with regard to his divinity and his providence as Messiah?
Well, as far as his divinity goes, when he was actually born, there's a temple of Janus. You know, Janus and Jambare, or Janus and Jambare, that came out, that were Pharaoh's wizards that put the rod into a snake with Moses. Well, they actually came out, as you might recall, then with the mixed multitude and crossed the Red Sea and were part of the Israelites. Would you believe it? But they are. They're mentioned there. Anyway, they actually went on. But they built a temple, or a temple was built for them. And that actually collapsed the moment Jesus was born. That's something that I looked up and researched, which I thought was quite fascinating.
That is very fascinating.
Across the face of the world, a number of things happened. I can't remember them all now, but I recorded that one in my book. But there were other things. And the animals, you know, when they were going into Egypt, and even when they came out of Egypt, the animals and the lions, they loved him and would come out to meet him and bow down to him. And everybody, Mary and the like, would be afraid and say, "No, son," because they're lions, but they knew who he was. And all creation knows who he was and is, because he created them. And for my book, it's from Anna and Joachim, the grandparents, their story, and then it goes into Mary and her life, and it finishes when they're going into Egypt. I didn't do the stories of them in Egypt. I had to sort of come to a point where I ended it. I could actually go on and do another one with them in Egypt and then the earlier years, but I haven't decided on that yet. I haven't got to do that. I could also write about her later years, you know, around the time of Jesus and her passing. But I haven't decided on that either at this stage. My book really just goes up to when they're going into Egypt, when they have to leave. And one fascinating thing, though, is Elizabeth. You know, we haven't mentioned about how Zechariah was in the temple and his and doing his priestly appointment. He was of the 8th order. What's the name of the order of? I've got it written down here. I've got some more notes. So he, when he became dumb, and when Elizabeth had her, got pregnant supernaturally, because they were older as well, and John the Baptist, the connections there between Mary and Elizabeth and Jesus, and how they were both supernaturals, which is quite commonly known. But, threading in Zechariah into the book, how he couldn't speak, and it was an interesting exercise. I went back through and I really pondered on when all of this took place and how it all took place, and for Zechariah to be speaking and coming into the Holy of Holies when the angel met him. And I learned through that, and I traced it back onto the calendar of the feast dates and onto the order that he was in the priesthood. And he was the Abijah, Abijar, and First Chronicles 24:10. It talks about that they, for 1 week, there's 24 priests, and for one that are chosen, and for 1 week, which is from Sabbath to Sabbath, but they all come together for the feast dates. They are to do their duties in the temple in Jerusalem. And how Mary's father, Joachim, was from the tribe of Judah, but her mother, Anna, was from the tribe of Levites and Judah. So Mary was both from the Levitical and the Judah bloodline. And as I thought on that, I thought, oh my goodness, that means Jesus is priest and king.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that is the Melchizedek order. King is Melchi, Zadok is priest.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, so I did a lot of work on that when I was writing the book. And, and then I sort of traced it back from the beginning. Adam and Eve to Moses was more the Melchizedek order. Well, it was. Okay. And then the Levitical priesthood. From Moses to Jesus, and then from Jesus, he instituted again the Melchizedek order. And through that, I also did some study on as much as Zechariah was in the temple and part of the priesthood, they actually lived separately. They didn't really engage a lot into the sacrificial order. They actually, like the 12 kings of the East that came over, were all keeping basically the Melchizedek order, which is, the Lord's feast dates and his commandments and his ways, but not the Levitical slaughtering of animals, shall we say, in their religious manner, shall we say, as it was in Numbers, as it was, and in, Deuteronomy, as the Lord gives the account to do everything. So, yeah, I thought that was a fascinating study. So a little bit of that is in my book to get people thinking. If they want to dig any deeper with it and think a bit deeper, they can, because I've got some dates and things in there if they want to do their own study on that.
Yeah, we released a book called The Book of the Order of the Ancients, and in that particular manuscript, I also traced down and track how the what's called the Church of the Firstborn in even the New Testament in Hebrews, the Church of the Firstborn is spoken about, but in the writings of Abraham and in the Book of the Order of the Ancients by Elijah the Thespit and others, it shows, and in the work that I did with the Vestures of Light and the Rod of Wonder, I also tracked down the initiation and how the garments of power and also the Rod of Wonder were these sacred relics that were passed down through the generations and given to the firstborn. Well, it wasn't always the firstborn, because it skipped over Cain, who was, everybody believes he was Adam's firstborn when we know he wasn't. And also Esau and Ishmael, that it skipped over them as well, and Judah, and went to Joseph. But all of them were ordained into this Melchizedek priesthood that began with Adam. and that Adam was initiated in paradise by God and made prophet, priest, and king. And we know that this was separated during the time of the 12 tribes, that the kingship was given to Judah and the priesthood to the Levites. But that, as you stated, and I covered this also in that chapter on the stem of Jesse, how Yahusha was the fulfillment of the Isaiah prophecy, and that it was through him that Mary, because she was both of the Aaronic priesthood as well as the line of Judah, that he was the one that reunited the priest and the kingship, and that he was priest and king. And so, yeah, it's a absolutely fascinating story. Yeah, it's a wonderful account.
It is, and it's when I sort of saw this, I was just floored and astounded, and I was thinking, wow, that's why the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. It's gone. And we knew that all of that was gone with Jesus, because he is the sacrifice, the fulfillment, and he came because of his promise to Adam. But he fulfilled all of that. But this is actually another level of that, where bloodline going back is the king and the priest to institute again the Melchizedek order. So gone is that Levitical Sanhedrin priesthood. It's old, it's finished.
Right.
It's now in Jesus. It's back to how it was meant to be, where we are all responsible, and we are the priests and the kings, as it talks about in the scriptures. So that was something that really, it was something that I discovered by doing this book for myself, that was a marvelous insight to learn.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from this book.
One other thing, you had made mention of how the Melchizedek priesthood does not slaughter animals, but they actually offer bread and wine, or flour, fine flour and wine on the altar of God. They did not offer animals in sacrifice. And we know that with Christ, that ordinance was done away with, that he was the Passover lamb. As John said, behold, the lamb that takes away the sins of the world. So that whole provision and ordinance, and even as it says in the scriptures, that the Yahuwah was not happy with the ritual slaughter of animals and bulls and things of that nature, and the way that they did it, because it was just emotion. It was meaningless, and that they were just spilling the blood without any there was no righteous intent behind what they were doing. They were just going through the motions.
Yes, and that also brings in the magi. Who were they? We're told that they are the three wise men, and they saw a star in the sky, and they decided one hot summer's day, let's follow that star and grab the gold, the frankincense, and myrrh. It wasn't like that. These kings were the sons of Seth, and they had kept the ancient path. They had kept the calendar, kept all these dates that were handed down from their fathers, and they met regularly at a particular place, at a particular hill, which had a cave in it. But they would never, ever go into the cave until this particular night, when the star shone, as it was predicted. One night, one generation will experience it. And this was their time. It was that generation, and the star led them into the cave, and in the cave were treasures, which is what they took to Mary and Joseph and Jesus, and who they were. And I was very privileged to be allowed to use straight from a book, The Revelation of the Magi, from Brent Lardea, he gave me the authority to use whatever I wanted from the book. So I have put some of it
Awesome.
in my book. Yes, there's a little bit at the back, well, quite a bit actually, about who they were, where they came from, and the Victorious Mountains, which is where they gathered up the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh, and brought it and travelled, and how the star would reveal itself to them, to each of the kings, in a different manner, in a different way.
Right. Yeah.
And
That's an incredible story.
Is it ever? Is it ever? And how to each king they would get one piece of the story of Jesus's life and purpose of being here, whether it was a baby in a cradle, or Jesus on the cross, or a spear in the side, or miracles, or they all had a part of the story revealed to them through this ever-changing star. And in my book, it tells you what that star really was, or who that star was.
Yes.
And it's just amazing stories. I said it would make a fabulous movie.
Yeah, that manuscript is one of my most favorite with regard to some of the newer manuscripts that has been released, over the past several years now. And there's actually 2 full compilations of New Testament Apocrypha that both Turney Burke and Brett Landau have worked together in sharing and releasing. And even the story of the healing of Tiberius that I read from last night was from one of their compilations. And there's a third book that they're going to be releasing that has all these incredible stories as well, that the Acts and the gospel accounts of the apostles. It's incredible. I'm looking forward to that book being released as well. But so much new information coming to light, such incredible knowledge, but certainly the revelation of the magi, and showing how it was that the promise that was given by the Word himself to Adam, that after 5,500 years, I'm going to enter into flesh form, be born of a virgin. How that promise was what established the order of the Magi, and that it was the children of Seth and the generations born afterwards that stayed vigilant in watching for the fulfillment of that prophecy. And then, as you said, they would go to this one particular mountain and bathe themselves, purify themselves in the spring, and then seeing the Star of Bethlehem that night and being led into the Cave of Treasures. Not only did they receive the bounty of all of those ancient testimonies that had been preserved there for them, and that given the knowledge and the understanding to translate them, I believe that we, even us, we are the inheritors of that legacy, of that incredible work, the testaments of the patriarchs and the prophets. But that also they, just as the Word told Adam, that prophetically in the first book of Adam and Eve, the forgotten books, the Adamic books of Adam and Eve, he told him that he was going to bring them to the Cave of Treasures, and that they would bring the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh that he had given Adam from paradise, that they would bring those as presents, and that the gold and the frankincense and the myrrh all each represented kingship and divinity and something else I can't remember as of right now, but yeah, that there was deep meaning and significance behind those particular items as well. And for them to, again, bring that before Yahusha, it's incredible prophetic fulfillment as again is revealed in the primary Adamic literature.
Yes.
All right. We'll be right back, everyone, for final segment.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures. Everyday questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
All right, welcome everybody for final segment. I'm glad that we had the opportunity to share some of these stories, Kylee, because I really love the infancy gospels. They're near and dear to my heart. And we also released a manuscript, the Yahusha Christ, the early childhood and infancy gospels, and to provide people this information. But I think it's great the way that you have put and combined all of them together in one single narrative. And yeah, it would be an incredible movie. Even like some of the things that, like, if people even included the early childhood and the infancy of Christ in telling the story of his life, I mean, how much richer and how much more detailed would the information and the knowledge, which is another thing. So many people um, criticize, even condemn individuals like myself and yourself who read and study the extra biblical manuscripts. And yet, when it comes to the early life of Christ, we get one account, when he was 13 years old, in the entire gospel, and nothing else. And as disciples of Christ and worshipers and believers on what he did for us and dying on the cross to bring us salvation and to restore us to our first estate and to rectify the fall, why wouldn't you want to know more about him? I just don't get that.
Yeah, well, I'm the same, and that's been my journey. I grew up in a Christian home. My mother's been a Christian pretty much all my life, but I very clearly, I just didn't really ever get it, I have to say. And, the stories and things, and it wasn't until later on in life. I'm nearly 50 now, so I was nearly 40 at the time, and I had my life all planned out. I was married with family and I had a great roaring business, but my world got shook up and I nearly lost everything. And from that, I was thinking, there's got to be more to this world than just working and being a slave and getting up every day and it being the same and the grind. And so it started me off seeking. As I said earlier on, I said to the Father, if you really are God, if there is a creator and there's a reason for me here, then it's only between you and me. I want you to teach me and you to show me, because if you can create the whole world, you can show me and talk to me and lead me. And I agree. Everything you tell me and show me, I will 100% follow you. And I tell you, it didn't take long for my marriage to go. And over time, I left my business. And I've been a truth seeker because of the importance of it.
Yes.
One day, every human being is going to be facing the great white throne and our Father, and he's going to want an account for our life and want to know what we've done with it. And where did we glorify him? Did we give any of it back to him, or did we just, do what we wanted and thought what we wanted, whether it was correct or not? So, yeah, he led me on this journey, but I had to be willing to put aside everything I'd ever thought of, all my preconceived ideas and notions, and be serious about the journey ahead. There's a scripture in the Bible that says that somebody, when they go on a journey, or is it they build a house and they sit down and they do all the homework, they work out how much it's going to cost, and do I have enough money? Because that person would be a fool to start to build the house and then run out halfway through and realise they're not equipped to do it. So I did that. I had to really sit down and put everything onto him to lead and to guide and to take care of me. And so, yeah, I did that, and I still am doing it. It's not easy, but we've all been brought up with preconceived ideas, whether it's through a church type of religion that you've been brought up with, or whether it's just your own family traditions. And we copy, and we do it without even thinking. And, there are very old traditions that we have, like Christmas and the man in the red suit and bouncy bunnies. And, it's great when you've got kids, you can play along. But I felt sick doing these things. And I knew I wanted to know the origins of it. I was serious about my quest for truth. And especially when I gave up my company, it's cost me a lot to follow truth. But I think the Lord honours one that truly does want to know the truth and is willing to stand by the truth that they have found and to share it. I think, and He's shown me lots of things through writing this book. And I just challenge everybody out there. Look, we've all been brought up with things, and we need to grow up and work out whether it's a fable or whether it really is fact, and to think about that a bit more and what that means, because we all have to give an account for what we do and what we teach others. And, that's sort of, and I started learning and reading and sharing, and then I think it was through Zen that I came in contact with some of these ancient scrolls. Also, I think I started with Enoch and Jasher. And, and once you go past the scriptures and you get into these other books, I know we're taught or told, you should only stick to the scriptures that are in the canon of what we'd call the Bible. But you see, these extra books don't change the Bible. They actually enlighten it. They give you so much more depth and information and background information. They can paint the picture. They are the people that were in that story, what happened before that story that you're reading about in the Bible, and afterwards. It's really important, I think, these books, because, they should be in the canon of scriptures, I think, a lot of them. But, of course, it would be too big to carry around. So,
if we did include a lot, especially of this, then, the Bible would be huge. But still, again, I think these manuscripts are so very important and deeply moving, again, when people consider them and read them. And that, again, if you want to know and learn about the Messiah in deep, profound, and intimate manner, well, certainly you have to include the early narratives of his childhood and youth, and then there's so much with regard to the Great Commission of the apostles and their going forth, and the witness that is preserved by so many of them in a lot of the different books, like the Acts of Thomas and things of that nature, which we include in the Great Commission 1 and 2, and that these New Testament apocryphal collections that are coming out, they have a lot of those particular narratives as well. So a lot of information for people to consider with regard to getting a clearer picture of who Christ was, and again, how he was anointed, and that he held the authority of divine providence, not from the time that he was baptized in the River Jordan, but from the time that he entered into this world, and even in those moments declared to the Magi and to Mary and Joseph and those that were gathered, all of the angels that came down to celebrate, because it was a really incredible moment of having come into the earth when he entered into this world, and that the cave there where he was immaculately conceived, it was said to be filled with the angels that serve him, and that they were witness and proclaimed even announcing to those that were gathered about the majesty and the incredible awesomeness of that particular moment.
It would have been amazing to have been James and standing outside and just imagine it. I know. And you know what? He's coming back.
Yes.
He's coming back with all the angels and the trumpet.
Yes, right.
What a sight that's going to be. Hiding it next time.
Right? Yeah, every eye shall see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I think too, when you learn and study these extra books, you get a deeper connection to how everything is, from Adam and Eve and the promise that was given to Adam because of the way that he was feeling being here, and he just couldn't cope. And had Jesus said, "Stop doing that, I will come. I will bleed like you have bled, and I will scratch like you are," and all of those things, and you get a clearer understanding of the whole story, and why everything happened, as well. Yeah, it's very important to read these books.
Yes, I agree. The primary Adamic literature is so prophetic in what. Because it was the word of the Lord that was speaking to Adam, and that had exiled them from paradise, but that he had told them prophetically, and that Adam was even given what are called the books of creation, which is an entirely other story that most people do not know about. He was given 5 books: the book of the signs, the book of astrology, the book of the wars of the Lord, the book of the generations of man, and the book of the law, that the Torah was known, and that they celebrated, even Adam celebrated the Levitical feast days, that Passover was honored, and that even when Cain and Abel brought their first offerings, that it was on Passover that this took place. And so, yeah, the fullness of the story, when you really begin to read and to study them, like we're told in the Aramaic Targum, that the altar that Adam had established, and that he himself bled, and that this was a sign, prophetic sign of how Christ himself would bleed, and for us, in order to bring a forgiveness of sin. But anyways, that altar was reestablished by Noah after the flood, and it was rebuilt and reconstructed, and that this was the same altar that Abraham offered Isaac, and that it was on Passover that he was willing to offer up his son, which God, of course, stayed his hand, but God, Yahuwah, had allowed and did offer his son, Yahusha, Yah salvation, Emmanuel, God with us, to die for us in order to redeem us. And so the story of Passover and how it was that Christ fulfilled the Levitical feast days, that he was the Passover lamb, resurrected on the first fruits, and that afterwards he sent the Holy Spirit on Shavuot, Pentecost, to fill the apostles for what would be the Great Commission. I mean, these things are so incredible and so important to know. But most importantly, as you said, in second coming, he will fulfill the 3 remaining fall feasts. And he will return on Yom Teruah. I believe he will take the judgment seat on the Day of Atonement, and that on Sukkot, New Jerusalem will descend out of the heavens, and that those that are worthy will enter into the Sabbath rest of the millennial reign for that 1,000 years of being with him.
Amen. And in fact, that's something I was going to touch on, but we talked about something else earlier, was Zechariah. I went back through the dates, and the first coming and the second coming, from what I have worked out, and I stand to be corrected, but it's just how I've worked it out, is that he was John the Baptist was born Passover, and then Yahusha on the Feast of Trumpets. It's all in my book there, but just the first and the second, the forerunner, John the Baptist, and then Jesus on the full feast, like the first feast, he was the Passover lamb, the forerunner to him coming back as a king. The parallels, once you start getting in and learning these things and learning his calendar, it's everywhere. I've actually started writing another book. Probably shouldn't give the title of it, but I will. It's Patterns of Passover, and I've gone right back from Adam, and I'm going through everywhere in the Bible and ancient books where it talks about Passover, because there's got to be more meaning to it, even though there is a lot of meaning. I want to learn more about it. And
awesome.
Yeah, and so I'm just extracting bits and pieces as I'm going along. When I'm reading and I come across it, I'm writing it and putting it on my file, and hope to get that all together to form a book. So anyone that's interested can then buy it and look at it. All the Passovers that have been mentioned in the books that I have known to date. Yeah, all the different things that happened on it. Because you're right, his calendar is what everything sits on.
Yes.
And unless we are familiar with it and understand it, we won't know what's going on in the future. And it's important to know these things. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a question in the chat room. Lynn asked about whether we have a playlist for the Targum. And yes, we did the Targum as our first extra biblical study in the Digital Book Readers Club. And so if you look on the DRC, the Digital Readers Club playlist, you'll find that I think we did the first 35 weeks we spent on reading the Targum, going through Genesis to Exodus before getting into all the details of the law. But you can find all of those studies there, as well as the parallel readings from many of the extra biblical books, which also verify the veracity of those things that are brought forth in the Targum, which there's so much more information for those that have never looked at or read. And many people are now including in their virtual house church, in their studies of the Pentateuch, the Targum, so that they can learn more and get greater detail as to those things that have been left out of the King James and the modern English translations. Like, for instance, the numerous mentions of the word of the Lord and the intimate relationship that he had with the patriarchs of old, which, again, is excluded from the King James. There's 11 translations where you find the word of the Lord in the Pentateuch, but in the Aramaic Targum, there's 219 mentions of the word of the Lord in the first 5 books of Moshe, which is quite a bit more, and that these translations have been excluded, and I believe purposely so that the Jews could hide the relationship that Christ had with the patriarchs, even Adam and Eve, before their banishment from paradise. But we've got just a few minutes more remaining, Kylee, and so I want to give you a chance to share whatever you'd like, and also know that you can find her book, I Mary, at the Sacred Word Publishing website.
Mm-hmm. Just on the Aramaic Targum, when the book club stopped reading it, I think it was in Exodus, I continued that on in my YouTube channel, which is called the Ancient Book Club, and I've read it right through now to the end of Deuteronomy, right through to the end of
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's all there. And if you're doing a study and you need Numbers 5, you can go straight to Numbers 5 and you'll have the Targums read there. So, yeah.
Nice.
One thing I just want to point out too, in my book, I decided after much thought to not use the name Jesus. Even though we know it's Jesus, we call him Jesus. I wanted to be as authentic as I could. So I have put it in there, Jesus in brackets, initially, but we've used his Hebrew name, which is the name that he would have been called.
Yes.
Which is the name of God, and Shua is Hebrew for salvation. So, salvation.
Yes.
And in a number of texts that name has been used. So I decided to put that in my book. So when you read it, it's Jesus. Yeah. So
Yeah, right on. I respect that because I think it's important, that people recognize and also utilize, because his Hebrew name has meaning,
mhm.
and so I think it's important that people recognize that, or at least know that, even if they choose, because of course he knows who we're intending and who we are meaning, but certainly I think he also appreciates when we do use his Hebrew, because it has a deeper meaning. Even the the Yod He Vod He, the behold the hand, behold the nail, is a reference to the Son, in the same way that Yah's salvation is a reference to the Son's connection to the Father. So
Yes, because he never really used Emmanuel, which is God, with us, even though that's what he was meant to be called. I looked everywhere for that, and it was always just his normal Yahusha. I just hope everybody enjoys this book, and I think it's just important. I think that we, for those. I encourage those that have come from a Catholic background to read the book. Her life, you have a love for her, so her life you'll really appreciate. You'll be stunned at what she went through and endured. And I think you'll have a deeper appreciation of her as a woman and a person, and her grief when Yahusha was taken from her, how John had to take her away, take her to the cross, and then he took her away because she just couldn't bear it. And just, she was a woman of great compassion and conviction, and a strong woman, but yet very gentle and frail, as you read through things that she has spoken. And in my book, most of it is actually ancient texts, and I haven't actually put a lot of my own, I haven't changed anything, but I've added in little bits, like what the weather would have been like at that point, at that time of the year, the surroundings, perhaps maybe what she felt as she was walking from A to B. So that's all that I've really put in there. The rest of it is just, I've laid out it all in a timeline to give it the most authentic viewing of her life from what I have resourced to put in it to date. So I know that there'll be more information out there than what I have put in there. But I've got all my books in front of me, and there's probably, I don't know, there's a lot here that speaks of her life that I have put in there. So, I really hope you enjoy it, and it's a good book to give to teenagers and not children so much, but to family members that want to know more about the authenticity of Christ and who he is and their story. Yeah.
Amen. I'll add one last thing with regard to when Christ was, crucified on the cross. He turned to John and told him, John, this is your mother, and mother, your son. And so he gave over to John to be the caretaker. And the reason being is because, again, Joseph was elderly and had already passed away long before even the mission of Christ and the ministry that led to his death upon the cross. So.
Yeah, and she remained with John in his house.
Yes.
Up until when she passed. and he did take care of her. And
Right.
I don't think she went out much. I think she stayed indoors and was just very, very somber about what had happened.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Kylee. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. Be blessed in your study. Good night, all. Thank you, Kylee. Good night, all. Shalom.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.